For as long as I've been aware of the phrase, I've never been the biggest fan of the phrase gray Jedi in Star Wars. For one, we've all seen the fan meme image thing that gets shown around, and I wanted to discuss this image a little bit. So let's talk about a simple canon and why the gray Jedi code doesn't work. Now, for the most part, I'm focusing on the movies, specifically 1 through 6. I never finished the sequel trilogy because after watching episode 8 in theaters, I was just burned out, so I never watched 9. So, for the sake of simplicity and for not throwing extra knowledge out that I don't have, I'm only going to focus on movies 1 through 6 as I religiously rewatched those as a kid. But since I never seen 9, I don't know how the Force fully changed with episodes 7, 8, and 9. So I'm going to ignore those for the sake of a philosophical argument. Does that all make sense? We're all on the same page? Okay, sweet. In the movies, the Force is always addressed by the Jedi and bystanders as the Force. They never talk about the light side, but adhere to a strict obedience to what they think is the will of the Force. The Force is known as peace, benevolence, justice, and equality. The Jedi, from lore, are peacekeepers, not soldiers, not warriors, but maintainers of a delicate balance. The dark side is always referred to as the dark side because of its nature of corruption. From the Jedi code, there is no emotion, there is peace. There is no ignorance, there is knowledge. There is no passion, there is serenity. There is no chaos, there is harmony. There is no death, there is the Force. The Force is shown to be on the good guy's side, and in the Lucas canon portrayal of the Force is a benevolent spiritual, for lack of a better term, force that ties all things in the universe together. It is the life stream of all things, as well as the will of all things living and dead. What about the Sith code? Peace is a lie, there is only passion. Through passion I gain strength, through strength I gain power, through power I gain victory, through victory my chains are broken, the Force shall set me free. The Sith code is about self-empowerment, but is a twisted way to corrupt, bend, and mold the Force to do their will for their own gain. Through my own power I shall show them I was right. Through forceful use I shall dominate my foes. The reason the dark side was always evil beforehand is because through the twisting of the Force, the Sith would use their powers for what they wanted, and it rarely ended in benevolence. By using the Force, they threw out the benevolent nature of justice, peace, and mercy that was inherently offered by the Force for all creatures to live freely. The Sith would enslave others, lording their will and power over others, and it caused these risks of inequality and upset the balance of nature and life wherever they went. However, that no longer works in the Jedi's favor if we look at the gray code. There is no dark side, nor a light side. There is only the Force. I will do what I must to keep the balance. There is no good without evil, but evil must not be allowed to flourish. There is passion, yet peace. There is serenity, yet emotion. There is chaos, yet order. This does not work in the movies. In the movies, the Force is portrayed as an inherently benevolent and good thing that maintains the balance. Yet in the Jedi Code, they do not say they follow the light side. They claim to follow the will of the Force. However, the Grey Code claims there's distinction between the light side and the dark side, and that it's a folly to believe in this. And it's a distinction that, quite honestly, from my small research, seems to have been more popularly coined with the advent of the video games. In most video games, we have a distinction of the light side and dark side powers, so we know what the Jedi and Sith typically use, because for example, with how the Jedi and Sith work, normally you would use different emotions and different ways of reaching out through the Force to have something obtained. The Jedi focus on peace and serenity, and by the will of the Force and with calm determination, I can make it happen. The Sith was about how to throw your emotions to force it to happen. How do I, through my power, achieve this? And the thing is that when you have the distinction of inherently good, inherently bad in video games, you do have to make that distinction. And I believe personally that having this video game distinction seep into the rest of Star Wars media has caused a lot of what we view as the Force to be different than what the movies originally portrayed. And I personally blame a lot of damage to that and other things that we'll get into. Because the Grey Code states the Force is just a force. It's not inherently good or evil. This contradicts the idea and philosophy of the Jedi teachings that the Force is inherently a force for good as shown in the movies. So now we have to ask, who is correct? Is the Force an uncaring existence, or is it a benevolent motion for good? Because now, if the Grey Jedi are correct, the Jedi are idiots as they ascribe incorrect truths of the Force and dedicate themselves to a dogmatic lifestyle that is inherently incorrect and worthless. Or in other words, the Jedi are dumb, wasting their time, and the Sith aren't inherently evil evil, because now, with the Jedi's beliefs, if they are correct, then the Sith are evil because they corrupt a benevolent force to gain power and enslave others through that power. Thus, the dark side corrupts an inherent force of good to make it evil. However, we don't see corruption as a good thing because of how it distorts and twists something that's good and becomes a cheap knockoff. However, if the Grey Jedi Code is right, then there isn't anything wrong with the Sith doing anything at that point. It's just another way of using the Force to do what you want to do. But if the Force isn't inherently good or bad, then there's nothing inherently wrong with either being calm and collected or being passionate and angry with your approach to getting things done. And another thing I don't like about the Grey Jedi Code is it straight up says evil exists but cannot flourish. Where's that distinction and how does that work? Because the Zygerian Empire is considered evil because it was a massive empire built up on the enslavement of entire planetary systems. Do the Grey Jedi think someone owning one slave is okay, but we can't have a planet of slaves because, oh, we can let a small evil happen, but we can't let evil flourish? Like, what are we doing with that? Because at that point, that means Jabba isn't really all that evil for having a drug and spice and slave trade, because Jabba doesn't have that many slaves. I mean, compared to the Zygerians. He has more slaves than most humans have ever owned in history, but that's besides the point. Because now, where's that distinction? The Jedi Code believes that evil and corruption can happen out of a person's free will, and that it is up to us to choose good and eradicate evil through knowledge. The Grey Jedi just think we're a mixture of good and bad, which means there isn't any reason to not use the dark side of the Force and its power. From a philosophy standpoint, the Grey Jedi throw out a lot of what we see in the movies as an inherent force of good and say, the universe doesn't care. It's almost as if the Grey Jedi philosophy is derived from the writings of Nietzsche, the German philosopher whose theory is that without the existence of a higher power, that morality is decided by what the collective consider is the common good, the moral good based on what we think is allowed to be permitted and not. This line of thinking doesn't match what we are taught in the movies, though, about the Force, and has other implications about the prophecy involving Anakin. The Chosen One prophecy is an awesome tale when looked at through the lens of all 6 movies, with some background information. One person would rise up to be the most powerful user in the galaxy and bring balance to the Force. However, how does one accomplish this? At first, we would all think the same as the Jedi, that a powerful Jedi would raise up to challenge and defeat the Sith. However, that would work in a perfect world. You see, with the Chosen One prophecy, we need to understand what balance is and how it works. With background information, we know that the Jedi Order had some issues in the prequels. It was rife with hypocrisy and corruption. Yoda was working to keep the dogmatic teachings pure as needed for the Jedi Order to be what they claimed to be. However, the hypocrisy of the Jedi was not isolated, but a widespread issue. With tens of thousands of Jedi across the galaxy, many were not living to the standards as needed for their choices in life. Some left the Jedi Order, which is fine as a choice, but others stayed out of pride. They did not seek to help others, but become powerful. They did not seek service, but payment. Jedi had secret families, formed attachments where they should not have, took bribes, and acted without consulting the Force or rationally thinking of what was happening. For example of this blindness, let's look at General Grievous' backstory. He was a general and a powerful warrior whose race was in danger from an insect-like alien race. As he began to turn the tide of the war in his people's favor, the insect race fled to the Senate and called for aid. Blindly offering help without examining the issue, the Jedi aided the insect race and massacred many of Grievous's people, forever changing the course of one man's life to gladly hate the Jedi Order above all else. Had the standard pragmatic approach been taken as the Jedi deemed correct, they would have investigated what was happening to ascertain the truth. However, they did not. The Jedi in the prequel era were hypocrites, and it makes sense in the long run why the Jedi Order had to be destroyed to be brought back to the way it needs to be. Another example of this corruption was Mace Windu's appointment to the Jedi Council as the Master of the Order. In the old canon, a purple lightsaber was given to a Jedi who did study the dark side, believing the best way to know your enemy is to study their tactics and use it against them to thoroughly destroy them. So in the older canon, it worked out that Samuel Jackson wanted a purple lightsaber, and it showed the pride and hypocrisy of the Jedi Order in a symbolic fashion. Although I personally like the purple color and use it from my knowledge of the old canon and always have for quite a few years, it should go without saying that in the old canon, no one with a purple lightsaber should be appointed to the Jedi Council, as the dark side always corrupts. Mace Windu's character was powerful, but prideful, and symbolically showed his pride and the corruption of the Jedi Order by having the second in command be someone who wasn't purely focused on the Force adhering to its teachings. For the older canon, I like the idea of the purple lightsaber color with Jedi being powerful warriors with issues and hubris, leading to a higher risk of downfall from the Order. Order. But as they don't see anything wrong with using the dark side to destroy their enemies, it is not a great idea to place them in leadership positions due to their precarious studies. New canon hasn't really focused or done much with saber meaning since Disney took over. The most I found from Disney canon details on purple lightsabers is moral ambiguity. I like the older canon for lightsaber colors, as it showed there was a symbolism and meaning behind the colors and allowed you to see what kind of Jedi you were looking at once their blade ignited, and it was a cool reward for learning more lore. However, that's out the window just like Mace's, so it is what it is, I guess. Now, back on track, we need to mention there was the Sith issue. With Rule of Two from Darth Bane, every Sith that rose up and killed his master inherited all of his power from the Force and continued to grow with each passing generation. Not to mention that as this cycle continued, if you killed one of the two Sith, there was always someone who could continue the mantle, and the power still exponentially increased. By having Anakin be the chosen one and join the dark side, he became subject to the Rule of Two, meaning that after Sidious's death, he went to inherit the raw power that Sidious possessed. Then, by ending the cycle with his death, Anakin took Sidious' power, but without an opportunity to get and appoint a successor, the power accumulated by the Rule of Two would dissipate and the cycle would be ended. The hypocritical Jedi Order getting a restart, and the Rule of Two being ended to bring true balance to the Force. So a full system restart, with someone being made from the Force by the will of the Force to bring balance after a massive reset was needed. This reset in just the movies works in line with the Jedi beliefs, as Luke was trained by Yoda, one of the greatest Jedi to exist, and was an adherent to the will of the Force, even when Yoda would not trust in the goodness of Anakin Skywalker that Luke believed was still in him. By just the movie canon, the Force is reset, and a Jedi Order is left to be restarted by Luke and follow the will of the Force as intended. However, in the non-canon EU, since the Yuuzhan Vong Empire had other dark side users, and there were other adherents still running around the galaxy, and the Rule of Two was still dispersed but not in full effect, you could argue for the either side of the Grey Jedi and the regular Jedi codes when it comes to balance. More so on the side of the Grey Jedi code because of the sheer number of dark side adherents. However, you can argue that the Force only cared about the hypocritical Jedi Order and the consequences of the Rule of Two more than a few stray people in the galaxy. So again, with the EU and the old canon, it's a toss-up, but you can make a case for either one with all of that information and different ways of approaching the philosophy of the Force. However, I also want to mention and address the other definition of Grey Jedi and the Grey Code that was originally used to describe Qui-Gon Jinn. So without using the Grey Jedi Code all that much, a phrase that is used to describe Jedi who act outside the will of the Council are sometimes referred to as a Grey Jedi. Honestly, I dislike this because why can't there be a different word for them? Why can't the Jedi trust in the Force, which might contradict the will of the Jedi Council if, say, they ever err or allow pride to cloud their judgment, because Qui-Gon wasn't necessarily rebellious, simply he acted as he believed the Force would guide him to do so. So that definition I find odd and a little dumb. Apparently in the new High Republic canon stuff, they introduced a title called Wayfinder that I hear is essentially what Qui-Gon did without having to be referred to by Grey Jedi. However, I don't know too much about that, so we're gonna gloss over that. So, to summarize all of my thoughts on this, the Grey Jedi Code seems to be a video game term that was later made popular by a bunch of Reddit tier atheists that contradict what the movies portray as the natural order and nature of the Force as portrayed by the original Lucas movies. I find it dumb, but with creatures like Bendu and the Father being personifications and essentially missionaries of the Grey Jedi Code, I can't write off the Grey Jedi Code because Dave Filoni made it canon in the Clone Wars and Rebels that there are things that represent and follow the Grey Code. So now the contradiction continues, and now I have to ask, who is right? If the Grey Jedi Code is right, then the Jedi are a bunch of dogmatic zealots who do not understand the will of the Force. If the Jedi are correct in their views, then the Grey Jedi and Grey Code adherents are a bunch of non-committal fence-sitters that don't fully follow the will of the Force and think some evil is okay, like a bunch of purple blade wielding Jedi. Kind of sounds familiar, and as if this wasn't very well thought out. Disney hasn't done well with handling Star Wars, and with how undefined the Force is and where it leaves fans of old, current, and movie-only canon, we can only speculate at best how this all works. The Force needs to be defined, and I would argue we need someone to figure out what it is, because without the consistency of what the will of the Force looks like, it will only muddy the philosophy of Star Wars and where everything goes. However, I'm a degenerate. No one cares. And I hope you all have a good day.